Keep going back to the moment my nephew tugged at my sleeve right before everything fell apart. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked if Grandma's party was going to be fun. I told him yes. I believed it too. I had no idea that within 2 hours my brother would put his hands on my 7-year-old son at a family celebration, and that I would have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping my child safe. My name is Nora. I'm 32 years old, and I've been raising my son Caleb on my own since he was 18 months old. His dad and I split up, amicably, mostly. But the day-to-day has always been me. I work as a dental hygienist in Columbus, Ohio, and I've built a quiet, stable life for the two of us. We have a routine. We have a little house with a backyard where Caleb keeps a tomato plant he named Gerald. We have each other. Caleb is 7 now, and he is genuinely the funniest person I know. He makes up songs about his breakfast. He insists on wearing his rain boots to the grocery store, even when it's 70 degrees, because, as he puts it, you never know, Mom. He is sensitive in a way that sometimes breaks my heart. He cries at nature documentaries and once spent a full afternoon making a get well card for a caterpillar he found that wasn't moving. His preschool teacher told me he was the most empathetic kid she'd ever had in her classroom. I don't know how I got so lucky. My brother Marcus is 3 years older than me, and the way our mother raised us, you'd think the age gap was 30 years. Growing up, he was the one our parents pointed to at dinner parties. The one they bragged about to neighbors. Marcus made varsity. Marcus got into Ohio State. Marcus landed a corporate finance job straight out of college. I got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and mostly learned to be invisible. It wasn't that our parents were cruel. They just had a favorite, and they weren't particularly careful about hiding it. Marcus married a woman named Patrice 6 years ago. She has opinions about everything: how you load a dishwasher, how you pronounce pecan, what kind of person you are based on your car. I tried with her for years. I brought wine to dinners she hosted. I complimented her house. I showed up on time. It never really took. Last fall, our mother turned 65. She'd been talking about it for almost a year. This milestone birthday. This big celebration she'd dreamed of. My mom is someone who marks things. She frames photos. She keeps a scrapbook. A 65th birthday was, in her mind, an event. And for most of the planning period, I was happy to help. I called venues with her, tasted cake samples, helped her write the guest list. It was actually a nice few months. She was excited, and her excitement was contagious. The money conversation started on a Thursday night in September. My mom called me while I was giving Caleb a bath, and I almost didn't pick up, but something made me dry my hands and answer. She said she needed to talk to me about the party budget. I figured she wanted help picking between 2 catering packages or something. I was not prepared. She told me that Marcus and Patrice had found a venue, a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Columbus that held up to 60 guests, seated, with a private bar and a dedicated event coordinator. It was beautiful, she said. Exactly what she'd always imagined. The deposit was due by the end of the month. The total cost for the venue, catering, and open bar, $18,000. And Marcus, she explained carefully, was in a bit of a rough patch financially. He'd made some investments that hadn't gone the way he'd expected. He and Patrice had already committed to their portion, roughly half, but they were short by $9,000. She needed me to cover it. I remember standing in the hallway outside the bathroom while steam curled under the door, and Caleb sang something about dinosaurs in the tub. $9,000. The number sat on my chest like a stone. I had exactly $11,400 in savings. Every dollar of it was earmarked for Caleb's medical fund. He has a mild congenital heart condition. Nothing immediately dangerous, but his cardiologist had flagged a potential procedure in the next 2 to 3 years. And out-of-pocket costs could run anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000, depending on what insurance covered. I told my mom all of this. She already knew, actually. She knew about Caleb's heart. She knew about the procedure. And still she asked. "It's just a precaution, Nora," she said. "The doctors haven't even confirmed he'll need it. And Marcus will pay you back. You know he will." I asked her why Marcus couldn't take out a personal loan, or scale back the venue, or ask Patrice's parents for help. She sighed the way she always does when she thinks I'm being difficult, this long-waited exhale that she's been using on me since I was 12. She said Marcus had already sacrificed so much for this family. She said I needed to think about what was really important. I told her I was sorry, but I couldn't do it. not with Caleb's health hanging over us. She hung up before I could say anything else. Marcus called 2 days later. He didn't ask, exactly, it was more like he announced. He told me the venue was booked, the deposit was paid, and that he assumed I'd come around once I thought about it more clearly. He said I was being emotional. He said a lot of things that I let slide off me, because I was tired of fighting and because some part of me still wanted, pathetically, to keep the peace with him. I said no again. Clearly and calmly. He told me not to bother coming to the party if I was going to be like this. A week before the party, Patrice texted me. She said they'd sorted out the financial situation and that we were still welcome to attend. I took it as an olive branch and said Caleb and I would be there. I thought maybe, somehow, we'd all just move past it. I've spent most of my adult life hoping my family will surprise me. They rarely do. The restaurant was on the 15th floor of a building in the short north. I'd dressed Caleb in khakis and a button-down, and he'd spent the whole car ride asking me what all the tall buildings were for. When we walked in and saw the city spread out below the dining room windows, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "Mom, we're in the sky." I squeezed back and told him yes. For a few minutes, I just let myself feel grateful that he existed. My mom greeted us at the door with the careful warmth she performs when there are other people watching. She hugged Caleb and told him how handsome he looked. She kissed my cheek. Marcus shook my hand, actually shook my hand like I was a colleague, and Patrice smiled at my shoes in a way that managed to be an insult without any words. We were seated at a table near the back of the room, next to my mom's co-workers from the dental office she retired from, which was a subtle enough slight that I didn't feel like I could name it out loud. Caleb didn't care. He immediately started asking the woman next to him about her bracelet, and within 10 minutes, he had charmed the entire table. For the first hour, everything held. My mom made her rounds. People told her she looked fabulous. Someone brought out a slideshow of old photos. I watched Marcus across the room holding court and tried not to feel the old familiar feeling of being the other one, the secondary one. The daughter who showed up didn't quite belong. During dinner, my mom came to our table and sat beside me. She leaned in and spoke quietly, and for a moment I thought she was going to apologize, or at least acknowledge the difficult conversation we'd had. Instead, she said, "I hope you've been thinking more seriously about Marcus's situation." I told her again, gently, because we were at her birthday party, that I couldn't use Caleb's medical fund. She stood up and smoothed her dress and said, "You've always made everything so hard, Nora." I excused myself to take Caleb to the restroom. When we came back, the dessert course had started and the speeches were beginning. My aunt gave a toast. One of my mom's college friends gave a toast. It was Marcus's turn, and he stood up and talked for almost 8 minutes about how much our mother had sacrificed and how deeply she was loved by her family. He used the word family 6 times. He did not look at me once. After the speeches, I checked the time. It was almost 9 o'clock. Caleb's bedtime is 8:30 on a good night. He was starting to get that hollow-eyed look he gets when he's overtired, leaning against my arm and dragging his fork through the remnants of his cake. I told him quietly that we were going to start saying our goodbyes, and that's when it started. Marcus appeared at our table. He wasn't drunk, exactly, but he'd had enough that his voice had that loose, careless quality it gets sometimes. Like the volume knob had been turned up 2 notches and the precision dial turned down. He said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "You're leaving? We haven't even cut the second cake." I told him Caleb was tired, that it was a school night, that we'd had a wonderful evening and I wanted to say goodnight to Mom before we left. "Typical," Marcus said, and he smiled when he said it, which somehow made it worse. Always an excuse. I stood up. I kept my voice very even. I said, "Marcus, please don't do this here." Caleb slid off his chair and took my hand. He was already half asleep on his feet, leaning into my side, and I remember thinking that I just needed to get him to the elevator, get him home, and tomorrow this would all be a bad dinner party story. Marcus looked down at Caleb. Something in his face shifted. I've tried, since then, to name what I saw there, and the closest I can get is contempt. He looked at my son the way someone looks at an inconvenience, and then he reached down, grabbed Caleb by the upper arm, and yanked him away from my side. "You want to leave, you leave," he said. "He's staying." Caleb yelped this short, sharp sound that I will never forget for as long as I live, and stumbled sideways into the edge of the table. His elbow caught the corner hard. He started to cry immediately, holding his arm, and the sound of it cut through all the polite dinner party noise like a fire alarm. I was in front of him before I'd made the conscious decision to move. "Let go of him," I said, and my voice was not even anymore. Marcus stepped back, hands raised, like it had all been some kind of misunderstanding. "He's fine," he said. I barely touched him. But the room was already different. People had turned. Conversations had stopped. My mom was across the room saying something to Patrice in a low, urgent voice, and Patrice was nodding along, and I understood immediately that whatever story was about to be told about this moment, I was going to be the problem in it. I knelt down and looked at Caleb's arm. The skin was already reddening where he'd hit the table. He was crying in that silent, gulping way that's somehow worse than loud crying, holding his elbow and looking at me like I would know what to do. I didn't feel calm. I felt something large and cold and very focused moving through me. "Nora, it was an accident." My mom had crossed the room. Her voice had the cadence of someone performing damage control. "Marcus was just trying to be playful. You know how he is." "He grabbed my 7-year-old, I said. "That's not playful." "You're making a scene," Patrice said from somewhere behind my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I was still looking at Caleb. "Baby, can you move your arm for me?" He tried. He winced, but he could move it. "Not broken, probably, but I wanted to be sure." "Is there a nurse here?" I said, loudly enough to carry. "Or a doctor?" A woman at the table nearest to us. I'd spoken to her briefly earlier. She'd mentioned she worked in healthcare. Stood up. She came over and crouched beside Caleb, introduced herself quietly to him, and gently examined his arm. She said his range of motion looked okay, but she recommended we get him looked at given his cardiac history. She'd apparently overheard me mentioning it to someone earlier in the evening. "She's overreacting," Marcus said. I heard him. Everyone heard him. And then the main door to the private dining room opened. I didn't understand at first why the room went so still. I was focused on Caleb. But then I heard Marcus make a sound, something between a word and an exhaled breath. And I turned. Standing in the doorway was a man I didn't recognize. He was in his 50s wearing a dark jacket, and behind him were 2 uniformed Columbus police officers. It turned out that someone in the dining room had called 911. I didn't know who then. I found out later it was a retired social worker named Greta who'd been seated 2 tables away. She'd watched Marcus grab Caleb, seen the child hit the table edge, and stepped out into the hallway to make the call without saying a word to anyone. The man in the doorway was her husband. He'd stayed by the door to fly the officers in. The next 20 minutes were among the most surreal of my life. The officers spoke to me first, then to several witnesses, then to Marcus. Caleb sat in my lap the whole time, his face buried in my neck. One of the officers, a woman named Officer Torres, was incredibly gentle with him. She asked him if he liked superheroes, and he said he liked them okay, but he was more into ocean animals, and she told him that was a way cooler choice. He almost smiled. Marcus kept saying it was a family matter, a misunderstanding, that he barely touched the kid. But 5 people had seen it. 5. And every one of them said the same thing. He grabbed the child's arm. The child was yanked sideways. The child struck the table. My mom hovered at the edge of everything, saying, "This is not necessary," in various configurations. Patrice had the presence of mind to go quiet, which I noticed. Officer Torres came back to me. She was calm, professional. She told me that what had been described by witnesses constituted physical assault on a minor in Ohio, and that I had the right to press charges. She said they could take a report regardless of what I decided tonight. She also said, carefully, that given Caleb's pre-existing heart condition, any physical trauma warranted documentation. I thought about all the times I'd let things go. All the dinners where I'd kept quiet. All the phone calls where I'd said, "I understand," when I didn't. I thought about Caleb's face when he yelped, about how he'd looked at Marcus like he couldn't process what had just happened. Because who grabs a child at a birthday party? I pressed charges. Marcus's face when he understood what was happening is something I won't describe in detail. I'll only say that for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like the difficult one. I felt exactly right. The officers took a formal report. Marcus was not arrested that night. The situation didn't meet the threshold for immediate custodial arrest, but he was told he would be contacted as the investigation proceeded. The guests around us dispersed quietly. My mom's 65th birthday party ended an hour early. We took Caleb to the urgent care 2 blocks from our house. His elbow wasn't fractured, but he had a significant bruise and some soft tissue swelling. The doctor who saw him, once I explained the full situation, was a mandated reporter, and she filed her own report independently. I hadn't asked her to. She did it because she was supposed to. Because it was the right thing. Caleb slept in my bed that night. He was out within minutes of his head hitting the pillow, exhausted and bewildered and still in his button-down shirt, because I hadn't wanted to wake him up to change. I sat next to him in the dark and just watched him breathe for a while. His chest rising and falling, his eyelids twitching with some dream I'd never know the content of. I thought about my brother grabbing him. I thought about how fast it happened. I thought about how many people saw it, and how Greta, a retired social worker I'd never met before that night, had done more to protect my son than my own mother had. The weeks that followed were not simple. My mom called me every day for the first 2 weeks. She oscillated between crying and lecturing, between apologizing for the party and insisting I'd blown this completely out of proportion. She said Marcus was horrified by what had happened. She said he'd never meant to hurt Caleb. She said the charges were vindictive and that I was destroying the family. I stopped answering her calls on day 11. I sent her a text instead. I told her that I loved her, and that I needed her to understand that what Marcus did was not a misunderstanding. A grown man grabbed a 7-year-old by the arm and caused him injury. Until she could say that plainly, without qualifying it or contextualizing it or asking me to consider Marcus's stress level, I needed some distance. I told her I would revisit the relationship when she was ready to have an honest conversation. She didn't respond for 9 days. When she did, it was one sentence. "I don't know what you want from me, Nora." I wrote back, "I want you to say that what he did was wrong." She never did. Marcus reached out exactly once, 10 days after the party. He sent me a text that said I shouldn't have grabbed him. Things got out of hand. Hope Caleb's arm is better. I read it twice. No, I'm sorry. No acknowledgement of the charges. No recognition of what it felt like to watch your child get yanked across a room. Just a passive clause. Things got out of hand. As if the situation had escalated on its own, and he'd simply been a bystander. I saved the text. I forwarded it to my attorney. Yes, I got an attorney. I know that sounds escalatory, but I'd filed a police report, which meant there was a legal process underway regardless of my comfort level. A friend from work referred me to a family law attorney named Patricia, who specialized in domestic situations. She was brisk and clear-eyed and didn't waste words. She told me the charges were reasonable given the documentation. That the mandated reporter filing from the urgent care doctor added significant weight, and that I should expect the process to take several months. She also helped me file for a restraining order, temporary, protective, keeping Marcus a specified distance from Caleb until the case resolved. That was granted within the week. In the meantime, Caleb processed things in the way 7-year-olds process things, partially, slowly, in sideways moments. His pediatrician referred him to a play therapist named Dr. Ruiz, who worked with kids in exactly these situations. Caleb called her the puzzle lady because she had a shelf of them in her office. He loved going. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the party, he was building a Lego set on the living room floor. A deep-sea submarine, which absolutely tracked. And he said, without looking up, "Is Uncle Marcus in trouble?" I sat down next to him. "There are some grown-ups figuring that out," I told him. "But what he did wasn't okay, and the people in charge of making sure things are fair are looking into it." Caleb put a yellow piece on the submarine's front hatch. "Good," he said, very matter-of-factly, and went back to building. It was one of the most clarifying moments of my life. The legal process moved slowly, the way these things do. Marcus ultimately did not face criminal conviction. The case resolved through a deferred prosecution agreement, which meant he had to complete an anger management program, perform 40 hours of community service, and remain on good behavior for 18 months, at which point the charge would be dismissed. My attorney explained this outcome to me carefully, gave me space to be disappointed, and then told me something I've held on to since. Deferred prosecution is not nothing. It's documented. It's on file. It follows him. The restraining order became permanent by mutual agreement. Marcus's attorney apparently advised him that fighting it would not reflect well on him given the circumstances. I'm telling you all of this from the other side of it now. It's been 7 months since my mom's birthday party. Caleb's elbow healed completely. He had his cardiac follow-up in January, and his cardiologist said the structural issue looks more stable than last year. The procedure may not happen at all, or maybe years off. I cried in the parking lot of the medical center for about 10 minutes when she told me. Happy tears. The kind that take you off guard. The medical fund is untouched. All $11,400. Still sitting there, still earmarked, still his. I still haven't talked to Marcus. I don't know if I will. There are days when I miss the idea of a brother, the version I always hoped he'd be. And I have to remind myself that missing a fantasy is not the same thing as needing the real person in my life. My mom and I have had 2 real conversations since the party. They were hard and halting, and neither of them ended the way I wanted. She still can't quite say the words I need her to say. I don't know if she ever will. I've started to make peace with the possibility that some people love you and still can't show up for you, and that those 2 things can be simultaneously true, without it being anyone's fault, and also without it being okay. What I know is this: Greta, the retired social worker who called 911, sent me a card 2 weeks after the party. It said simply, I hope the little one with the rain boots is doing well. Children deserve people who will act. He hadn't been wearing rain boots that night, but I understood what she meant. I wrote her back. We've had coffee twice since then. She has a grandkid about Caleb's age. The last time we met, the 2 of them chased pigeons in a park for 45 minutes while Greta and I sat on a bench and talked about nothing important at all, and it was one of the best afternoons I've had in recent memory. Sometimes the people who step up for you are strangers. Sometimes family's the people who see you at your worst moment and do the right thing anyway. Not because they're obligated to, but because they understand that a child in a room deserves to be safe. Caleb made Greta a card last month. He drew her as a superhero. Cape, boots, the whole thing. She texted me a photo of it hanging on her refrigerator. If you're watching this and you're in a family situation where the adults around you keep asking you to minimize what happened, to keep the peace, to think about how it looks, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the problem for refusing to pretend. Standing your ground is not the same as starting a fight. And the people who love you without conditions, who show up without agendas, who call 911 for a child they've never met, those are the people worth building a life around. Like this video if you've ever had to protect someone you love from the people who were supposed to love them too. Drop a comment if you've had to set a boundary that cost you something. I read every single one. And subscribe if you want to hear more of these stories, because you are absolutely not alone. I've spent a lot of time since that night thinking about cause and effect. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, honest way that life actually works. The choices we make accumulate. They stack up quietly, one on top of another, until the weight of them becomes visible to everyone in the room. Marcus spent years operating in a family system that rewarded him for taking and punished me for having limits. Every time I stayed quiet at a dinner table, every time I said, it's fine, when it wasn't, every time I absorbed a slight and moved on, I was participating in something. I didn't create the dynamic, but I helped maintain it. And the moment I stopped, the moment I said no and actually meant it and held the line, everything that had been carefully balanced on that silence came apart. That's not coincidence. That's consequence. What I keep coming back to is the question of what I was teaching Caleb in all those years of keeping the peace. Children don't learn from what we tell them. They learn from what they watch us do. If Caleb had grown up watching me hand over his medical fund because my brother pressured me, watching me smile at people who treated us like afterthoughts, watching me choose the comfort of others over the safety of my own home, he would have learned that his needs come last, that the people who love you get to hurt you, that staying is more important than being safe. I wasn't willing to teach him that. I'm still not. The intelligence it took to get through those months wasn't the kind that comes from a textbook. It was the slower, harder kind, learning to read a situation clearly without letting my feelings about it distort what I was seeing. Marcus wasn't having a bad night when he grabbed Caleb. He was doing what people do when they've never been told no, and finally are. That's a pattern, not an accident. Recognizing the difference between those 2 things and acting on it is something I had to build in myself, one difficult conversation at a time. And the resilience part. I won't pretend that came naturally. The days when my mom didn't call back, when I sat with the possibility that I might have permanently fractured my family by doing the right thing. Those were genuinely hard. There's no version of standing your ground that doesn't cost you something. The question is just whether the cost of staying silent is higher. For me it was. For Caleb it absolutely was. What Greta did that night. Stepping out into that hallway and making a call on behalf of a child she didn't know is the clearest example I have of what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not a speech, not a confrontation, not a dramatic moment, just a woman who saw something wrong and did the quiet, correct thing about it. That's the standard I'm trying to hold myself to now. Caleb is doing well. His elbow healed. His heart looks stable. He's building a Lego deep-sea submarine in the living room, and last week he told me, completely unprompted, that he wants to be an oceanographer. I told him that sounded exactly right. The medical fund is untouched, and every dollar in it is a reminder that some things are worth protecting, even when the people asking you to let go of them are people you love.